Welcome back to Beyond the Comfort Zone Talking Shit with KING-KAMBUF.
It's great to be here.
Today, we are really getting into the administrative core of what makes an architecture firm successful. We're pulling directly from our source material.
Big one.
Architectural records and professional practices of the services of KING-KAMBUF's architecture design studios, and this is issue 6, PcM, that's practice management, and specifically, we're talking strategic planning and branding a design practice.
And this is so critical. We're focusing on vision, on finding a niche, and how a small practice can actually position itself to win in a market that's just, it's saturated.
It is, and it's an essential conversation because you and I, we both see it all the time. Countless design practices, especially the small or mid-sized ones, are just trapped.
Absolutely. Trapped in a cycle of being underpaid and taking on, frankly, a disproportionate amount of liability.
And the ambition is never the issue, right? It's never about, we want to do good design. Every firm says that.
That's a given. The problem is almost always a vague, fuzzy market position. So our mission today is to move you past that kind of generalist thinking and give you a real strategic framework.
A framework to build a clear, profitable position that, and this is the key, actively shields you from that risky, high-stress, low-fee work.
Right. And that distinction you just made, moving from this vague ambition to strategic shielding, that is the core thesis of this whole deep dive.
It really is. The source documents are incredibly clear on this. Strategic planning, when you do it right, is fundamentally a fee defense system.
A fee defense system. I love that phrasing. It's not about finding the perfect font for your business card, is it?
Not at all. It's about making these calculated, documented choices that protect your time, your reputation, and, most importantly, your bottom line.
Exactly. And when we talk about practice management, or PcM, this strategic focus is the keystone. It really holds everything else together.
How so?
Well, it covers your business operations.
Yeah.
So how you approach your marketing, your strategic planning. But, and this is crucial, it's a direct input for your finances and your risk management.
Because your strategy gives you the criteria for which clients and which projects to even consider in the first place.
Precisely. So when you look at the whole body of PcM knowledge, all these concepts like having a go-no-go review process.
Right, or analyzing if a fee is even adequate.
Projecting your staffing capacity, allocating risk in a contract. Those aren't just isolated admin chores. They are the practical day-to-day manifestations of the strategy that you define right at the beginning.
So if your strategy is weak or, non-existent,
then your go-no-go filter is non-existent by default. And what happens? You end up accepting projects that just erode your profitability. And sometimes you don't even realize it until it's way too late.
That's the real danger, isn't it? The chaos later on.
It is. The structure you impose on your practice with clear strategic planning, it directly limits the chaos you have to manage down the line. Let's look at the risk part specifically.
Okay.
A weak strategy means you are, by definition, accepting risk that is way out of proportion to the fee you're getting. If you specialize in nothing, you can't anticipate common problems.
You can't standardize your contracts for it.
You can't standardize liability language. And you often end up holding risks like, say, a tricky code interpretation for a weird project type that should rightfully be on the owner or an external consultant.
So strategic planning isn't just, as you said, preventative medicine for your balance sheet. It's also, I guess, preventative defense against professional liability claims.
Yes, you're just reducing the chance for surprises. And what are surprises in architecture?
They're always expensive.
Always expensive. Think about it. A firm with a really strong, defined niche can negotiate better contract terms around the standard of care. They can say, we will guarantee performance within these very defined parameters because they know their process is repeatable and reliable.
Whereas the generalist firm,
The generalist has to rely on generic contract language, which often leaves them totally exposed to the client's, subjective idea of what the best possible outcome even means. Strategy gives you the clarity to negotiate for reasonable risk.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's build that strategy from the ground up, starting with vision. I think when a lot of people hear firm vision, they imagine
some aspirational slogan on the wall.
Exactly. Something that sounds great but gives you zero practical guidance. But the sources suggest a useful firm vision is the exact opposite of that. It's a practical decision filter.
A vision statement is worse than useless if it's just a corporate platitude. It has to be a functional tool that actually dictates your actions.
So what are those functions?
The sources break it down into 3 really practical functions. First, it explicitly defines what the firm pursues. That's your project types, your ideal client profile, the one who gets and values your niche, and your preferred delivery methods. This is your refined yes list.
And the second function, which I think is probably the hardest for architects to embrace, is that a strong vision explicitly defines what the firm declines.
The no list.
If you have a rock-solid vision, you automatically have a robust no list.
And the no list is where financial solvency is so often secured. We really need to stress this. The choice to decline work that doesn't align is often more important than the work you actually take on.
I believe that.
If your vision says you only work with repeat developers who value streamlined permitting, you automatically say no to highly speculative, unfunded projects. Or, the single residential client who thinks the design process is their personal hobby.
And by cutting the time spent on those low-probability pitches and those high-stress clients, you save a huge amount of unbillable time.
And liability. The opportunity cost is massive. Think about it. If you spend 3 months chasing a prospect who is just shopping 3 firms based purely on the lowest price.
A client who doesn't align with your core strengths at all?
Right. Those 3 months are capacity that you've lost. Capacity you could have spent on a project that would have paid properly and reinforced your specialization. The time you save by saying no to the wrong work is immediately reinvested as capacity for the right work.
That makes perfect sense. What's the third function of the vision?
The third function sets the firm's standard of care posture. This is what dictates your required operational rigor.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice?
It means how the firm manages professional risk, who your pre-vetted consultants are, what your non-negotiable standards for QA/QC are, and your firm's expected level of engagement in construction administration, or CA.
So let's take an example. If the vision is, say, to deliver highly energy-efficient commercial retrofits that minimize operational disruption.
Then your QA/QC standards must be rigorous enough to guarantee that performance. And your CA engagement must be comprehensive enough to actually enforce those high-efficiency details out in the field. The vision requires the operations.
The vision demands the operations. I like that.
Exactly. If you promise these high-performance outcomes, you have to have the internal systems, the documentation, the consultant alignment, the QA, all of it, to defend that promise.
Okay, that's a great foundation. Let's transition to the niche. Because for a lot of listeners, a niche just defaults to a broad building type, right? We do institutional housing or we do wineries.
And that's the path to becoming a commodity. The sources push for something way more potent.
It's something that's highly specific and critically repeatable.
That broad definition, we do schools, is the path to competing on price against every other firm that can draw a classroom. The winning definition, and this is key, is a niche is a repeatable problem set with a known playbook.
A repeatable problem set with a known playbook. I like that. It's not about the building. It's about the problem.
It's about solving a specific logistical or technical pain point for a very defined client. That concept of a known playbook is so powerful because it implies you have institutional knowledge. You have standardization.
Which inherently translates to higher efficiency and less risk.
Exactly.
Right.
Let's drill down into the examples from the source material because the specificity is what separates the profitable firms from the ones that are just busy.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so the education sector. Instead of just vaguely saying we do schools, the niche is refined to this: modernization of occupied K-12 campuses with tight phasing and grant schedules.
Wow. Okay, so that's not just architecture. That is highly specialized logistical consulting.
That's it. You're telling the school district, your prospective client, that you don't just design a building, you understand their biggest pain points.
The security protocols, the temporary facilities, keeping classes running.
And the bureaucratic nightmare of navigating specific state or federal grant timelines. You are selling peace of mind. You are mitigating their disruption, which is their biggest cost driver.
That's where the value is. What's another one?
Another example moves past the general "we do medical facilities" to focus on medical tenant improvements that minimize downtime and authority having jurisdiction or AHJ review friction.
Right, because a healthcare client measures failure in minutes of lost operational time. That's lost revenue.
Exactly. A firm that can prove they minimize that downtime, maybe through prefabricated solutions or pre-approved permitting processes, they're offering immense financial value that justifies a really high fee.
And the third example they give is net zero small civic buildings using a kit of parts envelope and MEP strategy. So that combines a typology, a performance goal, and a specific methodology.
It's that combination that creates the competitive moat around your practice. It's not just green design. It's a specific size, a specific performance target, and a standardized delivery method. And this leads us directly to why niches win.
Because they allow you to build that operational playbook.
Yes. You can reuse standardized templates, details that have been tested and approved. You can leverage the same consultant teams who already know your system. And critically, you can streamline your permitting relationships with the local AHJ.
I think this is where a lot of architects, especially ones coming from a very academic background, they start to struggle. They see standardization and repetition as a loss of creative freedom. How does a firm balance that need for standardization, which drives the profit, with a client's desire for something bespoke and unique?
That's a really powerful and necessary question. The key is that the standardization happens at the level of process and detail management, not necessarily the final aesthetic output.
Okay, unpack that for me.
That firm specializing in net zero civic buildings. They standardize the wall section, the flashing details, the mechanical interfaces, the coordination workflow, all the high-risk, labor-intensive components that clients don't see or care about.
And this allows the designers to allocate more creative time to the things the client does value.
Exactly. Like massing, materials, site response. They can focus there because they aren't reinventing the technical wheel on every single project.
So what you're saying is standardization reduces the risk and overhead of the technical complexity, which frees up the team to deliver bespoke value instead of bespoke error.
Precisely. When a project is predictable, the schedule, the cost, the coordination are largely known because you've done it before, the perceived risk just drops dramatically.
Right.
And when risk drops, your confidence in charging higher value-based fees goes way up. The standardization becomes the premium product. You're selling certainty.
Okay, so we've set the foundation. Vision is the filter, niche is the repeatable problem set. Now, how do you translate that internal clarity into external market dominance? This is positioning and branding.
Right, and this is where it gets tactical. Because strong positioning isn't just passive advertising, it's an active combination of three very specific elements.
It's the external proof that your internal strategy is reliable.
That's it. It requires perfect alignment between your promise, your proof, and your pricing logic. If any of these three pillars is missing or misaligned, the whole thing fails, and you're right back to competing on price.
Let's start with the promise. This has to be a reliable, specific outcome, tied directly to the niche, right?
Yes. If your niche is fast medical tenant improvements, your promise isn't award-winning design. Your promise is, we guarantee a 10% faster permitting process because of our established AHJ protocols, which gives you 95% certainty on your construction schedule.
And that leads directly to the second pillar, proof. Why should anyone believe that very specific promise? This is where I see small firms fail. They show glossy, subjective photos when they should be showing objective data.
Exactly. So what constitutes strong, defensible proof, especially when you're up against a larger competitor?
You need concrete, verifiable metrics. Large firms compete on bulk capacity. We have 100 people, we can handle it. The small firm's edge has to be clarity, speed, and fewer surprises. So their proof has to reflect that.
So we need detailed case studies showing timelines and efficiency gains. Hard metrics like, we reduced rework RFIs by 40% on this project type because of our standardized detail library.
Client testimonials that speak specifically to predictability and certainty, not just aesthetics. And the ultimate proof.
Repeat clients, the ones who value that certainty enough to come back.
Okay, and finally, the third pillar, pricing logic. This is about defending the fee. You're not just giving them a number. You're explaining why that number, which might be higher than your competitors, is actually reasonable given the value and the risk reduction you provide.
Your pricing logic explains how your higher fee actually saves the client money on the total project cost. The conversation shifts from, what do you charge, to what value do you lock in?
So examples would be fewer construction change orders because the documents are systematically coordinated.
Smoother permitting, faster delivery, reducing the owner's loan carrying costs, or lower lifecycle costs because of your proven performance strategy.
This flips the entire competitive argument. Instead of competing on who can draft drawings for the lowest bid, you're competing on who can reduce the client's biggest financial risks over the entire life of the project.
Precisely. Now let's talk about the part of branding that architects so often forget.
The part that isn't the website or the logo?
Right. The source material is so emphatic about this. Your brand is inseparable from your practice methodologies, your operations.
It's the lived operational reality of actually working with your firm.
Absolutely. The true measure of a firm's brand is rooted in these operational elements that the client experiences or that the contractor suffers through.
Like what?
How fast does the firm respond to a query? How clean, coordinated, and understandable is the CA documentation? Is scope creep caught early and proactively managed? Do the drawings actually coordinate cross disciplines? Are the specs written clearly enough to be legally enforceable in the field?
So if your flashy marketing material promises seamless concierge project delivery, but your specs are just generic boilerplate and your RFI responses take 5 days,
Your operational reality just betrayed your marketing promise. Your operations are your brand. And if those operations are inefficient, you burn unbillable time, you create chaos internally, and that translates to cost overruns externally.
so it all has to be designed to execute the external promise of your niche, predictably.
That's it. To visualize this, the sources use the idea of the strategy triangle: market, services, and operations. These three corners have to be in perfect alignment.
And if they're not,
The strategy collapses. And it almost always leads to a profitability failure.
yeah.
Let's use that example from the text. A firm picks a niche in, say, high-end residential. That's their market and services corner.
Okay, and that niche demands some intense operational requirements. 24/7 client responsiveness, complex custom detailing, the ability to iterate and pivot on the design quickly.
But what if the firm's operations corner their internal systems? Consists of slow review cycles, generic contracts that don't cover endless revisions, and no dedicated staff for that high-touch client communication.
The strategy's doomed.
They cannot meet the luxury expectation that their niche has set. The fee, which has to be high to cover that operational intensity, is suddenly totally inadequate because the internal overhead needed to manage all the mistakes, the rework, and the client's frustration just skyrockets. Misalignment isn't just inefficient, it's a geometric necessity. When that triangle fails, the only thing left to compete on is price.
Okay, we have to see this in action. We need to see this strategy deployed in a real-world, high-stakes situation. Let's run through that case study from the source material. The classic scenario: a demanding client who is very clearly shopping for the lowest possible price.
Right. This is where strategy moves from the whiteboard into tactical negotiation and really risk defense.
So the setup is probably familiar to a lot of our listeners. It's an adaptive reuse project, a challenging conversion of an old light industrial building into a design studio and gallery.
And it's in a competitive urban market.
The timeline is super tight because of an expiring lease. The city's review process is notoriously unpredictable for reuse projects, and the landlord controls all the base building constraints, the mechanical, the structural.
And on top of all that, the client is just waving these massive red flags. They want fast design, which is always code for unrealistic schedule expectations.
They're openly shopping 3 firms, so you know they're prioritizing cost over value.
They insist on a low lump sum fee, which caps your earnings against what could be explosive scope creep.
They hint at skipping construction administration to save money.
And they want some undefined branding help. They use those vague words like make it iconic.
That whole cocktail of demands: fast, cheap, undefined scope, high-risk building, minimal oversight. That's a recipe for bankruptcy and the lawsuit. So how does the competent, strategically focused architect respond?
The primary strategic countermove is to refuse to lock in a risky lump sum fee when the scope is so undefined. So the first step is mandatory: discovery before proposal.
So you don't even give them a proposal for the whole job.
No. You respond by offering a short, fixed fee, feasibility, and concept sprint. It's a low commitment, paid engagement, and it has to be paid. That reduces the unknowns for both you and the client.
So this isn't a sales pitch. It's a technical de-risking phase. What are the actual deliverables that justify the client paying for this sprint?
The output has to directly address all those unknowns. So it includes firm program confirmation, what actually needs to fit in the space. It flags the major code risks related to the change of occupancy. It maps out a rough schedule, including all the external dependencies like the landlord and the city. And it confirms the base building constraints: HVAC capacity, structural loads, etc.
And the final deliverable from that sprint
Would be 1 or 2 defined conceptual options, an early risk register that documents all the code and base building issues we found, and most importantly, a scope ladder.
Let's define scope ladder really clearly. What does that look like in practice?
A scope ladder shows the client, visually, that basic services cover A, B, and C, the absolute minimum you need for permitting. Then, additional services level 1, which we recommend, covers D, E, and F things like advanced energy modeling or detailed interior design.
And then there's another level.
Right. Additional services level 2, optimal, covers G, H, and I,
Yeah.
like a post-occupancy evaluation or that vague branding help they asked for. Each level has a clear fee structure. This actively shifts the whole conversation from price to choice and risk mitigation.
That is so critical. You're reducing the unknowns before locking yourself into that dangerous lump sum.
Absolutely. Then the second move is a positioning move. Since the client is shopping on price, you can't argue about being cheaper. You have to compete on certainty and control.
And for a client facing a tight lease deadline, certainty about the permit path and the final cost is way more valuable than a 5% savings on design fees.
Exactly. So you present proof that's tailored to this project type. You pull out a mini case study. Here's how we handled a similar adaptive reuse project. We reduced rework by doing early AHJ check-ins and mandating consultant alignment. We specialize in making unpredictable projects predictable. You're selling a known outcome, not just a service.
Okay, now we have to confront the big one. The demand to skip construction administration. This is the deepest professional liability trap in the whole scenario.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk. First, you have to define every deliverable, every meeting, and critically, all the client decision deadlines. But regarding skipping CA, you have to frame this as an explicit risk choice by the client. You have to document it thoroughly.
So what does the standard of care dictate we do here, even if the client is really pushing to save money by cutting out CA?
This is so important. Even if CA is contractually omitted, the architect's general liability for design error often persists. It's this concept of foreseeable harm.
So if the drawings aren't buildable, or if the contractor substitutes a material that compromises safety, the architect can still be held liable.
You can still be held partially liable, even without a CA contract, just because you are the designer of record. So you must document, in writing, using language your firm's insurer agrees with, that without CA, the firm cannot protect the design intent, cannot manage substitutions, and cannot efficiently respond to RFIs.
So the document explicitly states that by opting out, the client is the one assuming the higher risk of bad construction, cost overruns, and schedule delays. You're transferring that liability back to them.
That is the essential function of that document. It aligns their expectations with the reduced scope. Failure to document this carefully is one of the fastest ways to increase your exposure and raise your professional liability insurance premiums.
And finally, after all this negotiation, the go-no-go filter comes into play.
Right. You review the fundamental misalignment. The red flags list is long. They're unwilling to define scope. They're pushing for a low fee. They want to skip essential services. They're shopping purely on price.
So what's the final decision?
It has to be strategic. Either you decline the work entirely because the client just shows a systemic misalignment with your firm's values, or you proceed only with that paid limited feasibility phase, with clearly written terms for continuing to the next phase.
And those terms would include a detailed fee schedule based on the known risks you found during that sprint.
Exactly. And the brand outcome here is crucial. If the firm does proceed, their operational standards have to immediately align with that brand promise of certainty and control.
It's non-negotiable.
Non-negotiable. If you take the work, you immediately deploy your internal systems, your checklists, your mandatory consultant onboarding, your fixed QA gates. Taking on challenging work only reinforces your niche if you have the internal structure to execute it predictably. If you take it without the system just to chase a fee, that high-risk project degrades your brand, it kills your profit, and it leads to the exact chaos the client was trying to avoid in the first place.
This brings us right back to the financial reality. Branding isn't just about looking good, it's economic geometry. If your niche and your positioning can't financially support the infrastructure and profit goals of your firm, the whole strategy is flawed. So what does this mean when we look at the numbers? Let's do the math.
We have to. We have to link the strength of your brand and your niche directly to profitability by doing this break-even sanity check. The core question is, can the fees your market position attracts actually cover your costs and deliver your desired profit? If the answer is no, you have to modify the strategy.
Okay, let's walk through the givens for the small firm example from the sources, because this represents the financial reality for any professional practice.
Right, so we have a hypothetical small firm. Their target utilization rate, that's the percentage of time staff spends on billable client work, is 65%.
Okay, 65.
Their annual overhead is $260,000. That covers all the non-billable fixed costs, rent, software, insurance, marketing, all of it.
And the staff.
Total staff of 3 people, each working about 1,800 paid hours per year. And they're aiming for a desired profit of $90,000.
And that $90,000 profit goal is important. It's not just survival money, it's the firm's required investment back into itself or distribution to the owners. Okay, so let's calculate the rate they must charge to hit that goal.
Step 1, total paid hours. 3 staff members times 1,800 hours each. That equals 5,400 total hours paid by the firm every year.
Step 2 is calculating the billable hours, applying that utilization rate.
Right. We take the 5,400 total hours and we multiply that by the 65% utilization rate. That gives us 3,510 billable hours per year. This is the crucial finite pool of time you have to generate all your revenue.
Okay. Step 3, determine the total needed revenue.
That's the $260,000 in fixed overhead plus the $90,000 in desired profit. So that totals $350,000. That is a revenue target that has to be generated by those 3,510 billable hours.
And step 4, the economic truth, the required net revenue per billable hour.
We divide the total needed revenue, $350,000, by the billable hours, 3,510. This gives us approximately $100 per hour net.
$100 per hour net. And that's the minimum amount that has to be left over after all your direct project costs, like consultant fees, are paid for every single billable hour.
Just to meet overhead and profit goals, this $100 net rate is the defining feature of the practice's economic geometry.
But this is the net rate. How does a firm translate that into the actual gross fee they have to charge the client?
That's the vital next step. This is where the direct personnel expense, or DPE, multiplier comes in. The multiplier covers the direct cost of the employee, their salary and benefits, plus the amount needed to cover overhead and profit.
Okay, so if the firm's DPE for staff averages, say, $35 an hour.
And we need $100 net revenue per hour on top of that, we're requiring a total gross billable rate of at least $135 an hour.
So the multiplier needed would be the $135 gross divided by the $35 DPE, which gives us a multiplier of about 3.85. So for every dollar you spend on an employee's wages, you need to generate $3.85 in gross fees to stay solvent and profitable.
Exactly. And if your firm's competitive position or your niche only lets you charge fees that equate to a multiplier of, say, 3.0, which is a common industry mistake, you're only netting $70 an hour. You're losing $30 towards your profit goal on every single billable hour.
And this really highlights the risk of dilution. If a firm takes on a vague, low-fee project that's outside its niche and that project is inefficient, it just dilutes the overall firm utilization and erodes the effective net rate across the entire practice.
That's why the utilization number is so important. If your utilization drops from 65% down to, say, 55%, maybe because you're chasing too many unbillable proposals or dealing with inefficient projects, your total billable hours shrink from 3,510 to 2,970.
But the $350,000 in fixed costs and profit hasn't changed. That now has to be carried by significantly fewer hours.
Right. And when you divide $350,000 by 2,970 hours, the required net revenue per hour skyrockets to almost $118 per hour.
Wow.
The required net rate has to increase dramatically. This is the financial imperative behind strategic planning. High utilization, supported by a specialized niche, is the only way to keep your fee multiplier, and therefore your gross fee, at a reasonable marketable level while still being profitable. The action required is clear. Fix utilization, raise fees, reduce overhead, or standardize your delivery. There's no other way.
We've covered the theory and the financial geometry. Let's look at some of the specific ethical and professional standards that come up when you try to deploy this strategy, starting with preventing that undefined scope creep.
And this often starts in what I call the ethics corner. It's that scenario where a developer asks you to bundle a bunch of sophisticated additional services, sustainability consulting, lifecycle analysis, specialized BIM modeling into a lump sum proposal.
With the promise that they'll figure the fees out later or we'll handle that on the back end.
Right. They're pressuring you to commit to potentially massive uncompensated scope just to get the basic job.
So what's the standard of care response?
It has to be unyielding. Never bundle undefined additional services into a fixed fee. It's a severe failure in risk management. Those undefined services will inevitably take more time than anyone anticipates, and the firm will just eat the cost. You must clarify the scope, define the deliverables, confirm the consultant roles, and agree on compensation before it gets documented in the agreement.
So how do you respond to that political pressure to just include it?
You use that scope ladder concept we talked about. You offer a menu, basic services are clearly priced. And then you list the additional services with their own clearly priced separate scopes attached. If the client declines them, you document that decision.
This ensures you get paid for what you deliver and prevents that massive liability exposure.
Exactly. And if the client says, we'll figure it out later, you have to politely decline to include it in the contract until the scope is fully defined.
Okay, moving on to branding assets. We've established that a brand is more than a logo. What specifically constitutes true positioning proof that convinces a client to pay that higher multiplier?
True value comes from assets that improve predictability and demonstrate proprietary expertise. The superficial stuff, like a new color palette, is easily copied. The strongest assets include a repeatable consultant team specific to that project type.
Because that team is already aligned on your standards, which speeds up coordination.
It reduces all that interdisciplinary friction. Another asset is a proprietary wall section detail library, or specification language for your niche. This is proprietary knowledge that reduces errors.
And the third?
Demonstrable post-occupancy performance metrics. Real proof that your net zero civic building actually performed at net zero, or that your medical tenant improvement had X% fewer change orders than the industry average. These assets prove value. They shift the conversation from subjective taste to objective performance.
Okay, let's circle back to speed. If a firm's niche is defined by speed, like fast tenant improvements, where does that speed actually come from? We said shortcuts lead to chaos, so what's the real operational change that enables speed?
It has to come from systems. The operational change that best supports a brand promise of speed is standardization and rigorous internal management.
So standardizing drawing templates?
Standardizing the consultant onboarding process so everyone starts with the same checklist, and using milestone checklists rigorously. You're speeding up the low-value, high-risk part of the work, the documentation, to free up time for the high-value design decisions.
And conversely, if you try to get speed by removing QA/QC reviews or skipping coordination meetings,
You are simply trading time now for massive liability later, which destroys your reputation and your profit margin. Those shortcuts are the definition of operational failure. They destroy the brand promise because the inevitable errors lead to schedule delays and cost overruns, the exact surprises the client was paying you a premium to avoid.
Okay, one final trap to address: the danger of vague claims in positioning. Why is a claim like the highest quality firm in town so problematic?
It's problematic because it's impossible to prove, and it does nothing to differentiate your specific outcomes. Quality is subjective. It's undefined. If you claim to be the highest quality, how does a client verify that? Better positioning has to tie directly to measurable, verifiable outcomes.
Like that 40% reduction in change orders or certainty in the permit timeline.
Right. Measurable outcomes are defensible. Subjective claims just raise client expectations without providing the proof or the pricing logic to justify your fee.
And just to reinforce that CA dilemma one last time, when a client demands reduced services, particularly omitting CA, the standard of care requires comprehensive documentation of the risks.
That's right. If a client absolutely insists on skipping CA, you can't just agree. You have to explain the full spectrum of risks, that you can't protect design intent, can't manage substitutions, can't ensure the project meets the expected standard. You have to offer CA options, limited oversight, full oversight, and then document the client's explicit decision to omit or reduce those services, often requiring a client sign-off on that risk transfer. Failure to document that is a significant liability exposure that is just not worth the fee.
We have taken a very deep dive into strategic planning and branding, covering everything from economic geometry and the DPE multiplier to the tactical handling of high-risk clients. Before we wrap up, let's synthesize the key takeaways, the points that should be guiding your practice management decisions every single day.
Yeah, let's do a pin-up summary. The 5 truths of professional practice strategy. First, remember that strategy is a filter. It defines what you don't do, which protects your capacity for the right work.
Second, a niche is not a typology. It is a repeatable problem set with a known playbook, designed to standardize risk and maximize efficiency.
Third, positioning requires that alignment. A clear promise, verifiable proof, and a defensible pricing logic.
And maybe most critically, your true brand is defined by how your projects actually run your operations. Gotta-go decisions aren't just admin. They are branding in action, protecting your focus and your capacity.
Right. And if you can't explain the measurable value you bring, you will automatically be forced to compete on price, which, as we saw in the math, is a strategy that just guarantees failure for a professional service firm.
Always define scope before fee. And if services are reduced, especially CA, document those reduced expectations and the client's assumption of risk.
And finally, operational systems create speed and quality. Shortcuts create claims and chaos. Focus on building the systems that support the fee you need to charge.
This whole strategic approach forces you to move from just passive learning to active implementation, which is really the whole point of beyond the comfort zone talking shit with KING-KAMBUF. It's time to take this info and apply it to your practice today.
So we'll leave you with 3 specific action items to turn this knowledge into a real fee defense system for your practice. 1. Draft your firm's one-sentence niche statement. Make sure it specifies the problem you solve, the ideal client, and the measurable outcome you deliver. Be absolutely ruthless with this specificity.
2. Write a formal, active go-no-go checklist with 8 to 10 red flags. And don't use generic warnings. Tailor it specifically to the types of clients or projects that have historically caused your firm the most financial pain.
And 3. Build a tangible proof kit. Choose 3 mini case studies from your past work and make sure each one highlights one measurable, verifiable outcome. Not just beautiful photos, but a metric related to speed, cost savings, performance, or certainty. This is your arsenal for defending your fee multiplier.
Focus on those actions. They're the steps that turn conceptual strategy into a real, functioning fee defense system for your architectural practice. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth exploration of professional practice strategy.
We hope this helps you define your niche, raise your fees, and select only the right, profitable projects.